it gives me great pleasure to welcome and introduce our speakers to you. And so hopefully I'm going to have both speakers online by the end of the workshop. At the moment, Uli is struggling to get online. He's also not well today, so depending on whether we are able to chat to him, he'll be joining us a little bit later. But for now, we have Ashraf, who's coming to us, as I said, from Belgium. And I'm going to be introducing him to you. I'm going to take his camera offline now, just so that we can make sure that we get the best possible signal coming through. So Ashraf is the Group Managing Director at NSF International. He actually was telling me that he looks after the whole of Europe, also some of the Northern African countries. He's had a wonderful, exciting journey in food safety and quality management systems, and worked in a number of different capacities. He started his life as a food safety and quality consultant. I'm very happy to hear that there's two of us that have started our life in quality, and then moved into business development, merger, acquisitions, and finance. But the most interesting part of this is the fact that he is a doctor of veterinary medicine, and so knows a lot about animals. He also holds a Master of Science as well as an Executive Master in Business Administration. So it's a very interesting combination, but I can't wait to hear from him in terms of what he has to offer and how he can take us through the process of new product development and how we can make sure that we do this in the best way possible. So I'm not going to hand over control to him, and he's going to take us through his presentation, and then we're going to have some questions and answers at the end of the session. So Ashraf, over to you.
Hello from Belgium. It's a lovely weather in here, 30 degrees today. It's been the case for the last couple of days. I'm very excited and happy to be here with you to share with you our flagship services around product lifecycle services. But before that, let me just take 5 minutes to introduce NSF International. Most of you know NSF International as a public health and safety organization that provides services around risk management, consulting, training, and so on. With the mission, next slide, please.
Sure. With
the mission, actually, of protecting and improving human health. This is something that's very important for us. We have been following this mission for a long time. It resonates with the team across all division, across all different parts of the management. We try to achieve our mission through several sets of services. Next slide, please.
Ashraf, won't you just move the microphone slightly? We're picking up a little bit of sort of crackle on our side. I think it's just a connection.
Okay, can you hear me right now?
That's better. Thank you so much.
Okay. So we provide our services to achieve our mission through writing standards. This is something that we started back in 1944. Actually, the company was founded in 1944 by a couple of professors of the University of Michigan. And we started by developing standards around food and drinking water, indoor quality, and so on. But ever since, the business has been growing tremendously. We right now provide services around testing products, certifying those products, certifying systems, auditing, consulting, and training. So everything we do revolves around safety and public health risk that is related to operations. Next slide. So we have we provide services in different parts of the world. It's very interesting to see that the business has been growing a lot over the last 2 decades. We start having a very good presence in Europe, but also in Africa, in Asia. So we have more than 60 offices around the world. We provide services in more than 175 different countries. Again, those services can be auditing, training, and so on. More and more, we try to provide services that's going to help customers, they're going to help the food industry, they're going to help retailers to manage the safety and the quality of their ingredients. As you probably know, we work in an industry, which is the food industry, which is highly efficient if you compare it to other industries. And we've been trying to support our customers around the world because this presence is very important to make sure that the risk is mitigated. Next slide. So this is something I'd like to talk about. I mean, NSF is not only about food, but we provide services around the water quality, health sciences, and everything we do, as I said before, is a combination of solutions that's going to help mitigate the risk related to public health and food safety. And basically, what I said before, it's compliance. We help companies comply with a set of requirements. It can be a legal requirement, it can be a customer requirement, but this is where we wanted to base our services, which is the product life cycle. We want to add something more, and this is where PLC and product life cycle come into play, because we want to help companies add value to the business, not only comply with the requirements, but help companies build and sustain a competitive advantage through introducing a differentiated products. And we started actually to crack that code and help companies to set them apart and to support them throughout product life cycle. And we will see how we do that in the next minutes. Next slide. So as I said before, the supply chain, the food supply chain is quite complex. I mean, based on a set of studies that we did recently, we found out that for a product, for example, a pizza, can have ingredients coming from more than 40 different countries. So you can imagine if something happens, and that's why you have sometimes big scandals, which is quite a mathematical equation. When you have a very efficient system, the small issue in that system can have a high impact. That explained the major scandals that we had in the past years, either in Europe or worldwide. So NSF, the way we differentiate our services, we have an integrated approach to food safety and quality. Right now, there is a lot of trend in terms of food consumption, and consumer would want to know where their products are coming from, not from a direct contact with the retailers, but they want the origin of their product. They want to use social media. They want to see whether there is any digital innovation around the supply chain. They want to make sure that their products are authentic. There is a lot of risk around food fraud. And this is the way we handle the supply chain, through having this integrated approach. And this comes at no surprise because we've been working since last year on new innovations such as blockchain, etc., to provide much more transparency to the end consumer. So next slide. So this is, again, in 30 seconds, the set of services that we provide. I mean, the objective at the end of the day is to have a safe and quality product. In order to do that, we provide a set of services around product. It can be label, it can be specification, testing, complaint, management, but we also have a set of system-related services as I described them. It can be certifying a system, it can be implementing a system. And on the top of that, and the more and more we're talking about implementing and using digital innovation to help companies use the data that they have been capturing and make the right decision. Next slide. Well, that's where the PLC journey comes from. As you probably know, every business has its objective to succeed. I mean, business success, however it is defined, is the ultimate goal of every business. Companies have always strived to improve their performance through the implementation of various strategies. These can be market penetration, market development, diversification, and product development. In fast-moving consumer goods industry, the last strategy, which is the product development, becomes even more a matter of survival, since companies are operating in a more competitive environment in which products are becoming a sort of a commodity. So the question is, how to keep up with these changing environments, how to sustain a competitive advantage. The answer is product innovation, product development, and this needs to be done in a bold manner using disruptive technology, and most importantly, it should be fast. Fast is the new way of succeeding, and this is where the compliance comes into play. So if we add new technology, changing consumer needs, the most important factor is the shortening of the product life cycle, where in the old times, product sustained competitive advantage for a long period of time. Today, it's just a matter of weeks or just a matter of months. Hence, the importance of developing a strong pipeline when it comes to product development. Well, that's the good news, but there is also bad news. The success rate in the market when it comes to product development and product innovation is quite low. When we're talking about 70% of product that make it into the marketplace, but many are cut dead early in the process. So this is where we started the reflection on the product lifecycle services. And as I said before, we've been trying to build on our expertise and experience around compliance management. When we talk about compliance, we talk about auditing a company, making sure that the label is correct, making sure that the list of ingredients is correct, making sure that the product comply with food law, and so on and so forth. But we were able at the same time, this is where the competitive advantage starts to appear, to combine those services with marketing related services, such as quantitative surveys, benchmark studies, sensory testing, home trials, and so on and so forth. We got the last 2 or 3 years a lot of questions from retailers of the food industry which wanted to communicate the right message. And recently we had a conversation with a major retailer in Europe asking us to help them to communicate the right message around a product category. So our question to them were, so what type of message you want to communicate? What's your competitive advantage? So how you differentiate with the competition? And we found out actually that this question have not been taken into account when the product was developed, when the category was developed. So it was quite too late to come up with this kind of competitive attribute that you want to communicate. So it's very important to address that early on in the process. So next slide. So this is based on the work of an international guru of product development, a guy called Robert Cooper. He said that the 3 main reasons why products fail in the market. The first one is a me too or tired new product, which means that we just want to do the same as the competition. The second one is weak front-end homework. So we just decide to develop a new product without analysis, without a prior homework. And the last one, which is very, very important, the lack of customer and market insights. So as I said before, it's very important to add the customer voice and to include it early on in the process and test along the way. If you want to develop a new product, well, let's first focus on what you want to do. What's your target market? What the type of ingredients? What's the trends in terms of the food consumption? What's the additives and preservatives that are questionable, although they can be legal. And we've been working with a lot of retailers and food manufacturers, in which we consult with them and we tell them there are a lot of food additive and preservative that are okay from a legal standpoint, but they are questionable. So if you wanted to develop an added value product and distinguish from the competition, this is something maybe that you need to take into consideration. Next slide. So, well, the journey starts first by getting a lot of information, a lot of insight from the environment, from the consumer trend, the competition, the unmet needs. I just give you some of the outcomes of a study that we conducted last year in terms of the buying behavior of consumers in Europe. I mean, the interesting thing about marketing research, as Paul Samuelson mentioned before, it's very difficult to get information from the consumers as long as you ask the right question. It's very important to ask the right question around what consumers do, not what they think, because people, they don't think what they feel, they don't say what they think, and they don't do what they say. So it's very important to devise the marketing research in order to really capture the true behavior of consumers. So the study that we conducted last year around the buying criteria, actually the two most important buying criteria, the first one, it's obvious one, is the price, and the second one is the taste. So even though we are living in a world that's changing a lot, and there's a lot of diet requirements from different groups, there's a lot of things around sustainability, there's a lot of things about organics, etc. It's still the price is the major one, and the taste is the second one. So this is very important information that I wanted to share with you today. So through this planning that you guys need to be doing in terms of product development, it's very important to get the environment inside, the customer inside, the consumer trends, and so on and so forth. Next slide. So now, actually, is how are you going to do that? The product lifecycle is a set of different services. There are different stages, and I added a true example that we a service that we provide to a public listed company last year, and I wanted to share it with you at the end of the presentation. Next slide. So again, the market research technique that we provide is desk research. We go through what's going on in the world in terms of trends. Quantitative research, we do a face-to-face, a phone, a conversation online. We combine those with focus groups, benchmark studies. We try to get information, qualitative information from consumers in terms of how they consume, how they buy those products. And those information can be of an added value to the product lifecycle. Next slide. Well, this is where we as NSF, and this is our traditional services. The thing that we found out is that within companies, it can be mainly the medium-sized and big companies. They have a separate department. They have a marketing department, you have a compliance department, you have a purchasing department, and so on and so forth. But it's very important when ones have a project in terms of product development to combine different sets of capabilities in order to understand the competitive advantage that ones need to be displayed in the product, and this is where the quality department comes into play. So we at NSF provide this kind of services, so we can provide the quantitative, the qualitative, but also make sure that the ingredients are okay, are legal, are safe. They come from a lot of reliable suppliers. The suppliers are audited. The supplier are green in terms of risk management, and the ingredient fit with the product development purpose. Next slide. Again, next slide. That's something we do as well in terms of product formulation. Once you define the set of a product category that you want to develop, and you start looking at the ingredients, we can support in terms of formulating the product. We work with various chefs to develop the right formulation for the right customer, and also, I mean, it's very interesting to see that the legislation is moving along the consumption trend and the issues trend. So although you have something which is completely legal right now, that is I'm talking from the European Union perspective, there is a pipeline of things that will come into force for the coming years. So if you want to develop a product and you want to make sure that the product will sustain a competitive advantage and will just be illegal in the next 2 or 3 years, I mean, future regulation need to be addressed. So there is some emerging issues that one should take into consideration when product development are being handled. Next slide. This is something very interesting one. The product life cycle services starts with the product development, and if you want to develop a product, you need to include the voice of consumers early on and from the first formulation. So, for example, we have a whole process that we manage for major retailers in Europe, in which we invite a set of consumers to test the first recipes and to comment on that and to critique those recipes in order to develop the right product. And you have the second stage, we call that a discovery panel. So we discover, I mean, we find out the new formulation, the new product, we compare that with the competition. Then we have the expert panel, the coffee expert, the tea expert, and so on. And then at a later stage, we do consumer panels, 60 consumers, 120 consumers, and so on. And from that, we get a lot of insight around the preferences of those consumers. And it's very interesting because before committing investment, before committing in terms of operating expenses and development expenses, it's very important to increase this likelihood of success in the market, hence the PLC service that we provide. Next slide. Okay. Throughout the product life cycle, the specification, this is something we also do. I mean, we develop we have a new recipe, we have a new ingredient. So we test the new recipe with experts through a discovery panel. Then we make sure that the product has a fixed set of quality, and we do that through a development of specification, and we validate those requirements within the specification. Within the specification, there is also a labeling component. Next slide. Once we develop a product, this is something very interesting as well. I've seen a lot of, I mean, hundreds and hundreds of products that came as the best products when we do sensory testing. But when you go to the supermarket, you found that the packaging that was used to attract consumers and not the right one. So you can still have the best product in terms of intrinsic and sensory qualities, but you really need to make sure that the product is appealing in the shelf. So we work a lot with the companies to redesign their packaging to assess whether the packaging is appealing, again, through a set of marketing services, focus group, and so on. We also, this is something new as well, we start looking at some digital innovation in order to help consumer make the right choices. If you look at the food product, the information that are on the packaging are very, very limited compared to the set of information that are part of the whole specification. So how to make sure that those information can be accessible to the end consumer? So we developed some augmented reality application that help consumers find exactly the product they really want. If someone is interested in a product with a low percentage of sugar, they just can click on the percentage and sugar and just scan the whole shelf in a supermarket, and the application will identify exactly the product that the consumer wants. Next slide. And once the product is already launched, I mean, it's very important to track the performance. I started this conversation and this presentation through presenting this product life cycle, and you have this curve, which is a theoretical curve. For example, sometimes when you launch a product, the sales peak, and sometimes it is not. So it's very interesting to track the performance of product in the marketplace and see what's going on. And we do that through a gap analysis. We see whether there's a lot of complaint around the product. We do satisfaction survey, and we also do the consumer panel testing, because once you launch a product, there is a high chance that the competition would want to catch up. So it's very interesting to see that a product that came in the first level last year, I mean, the following year they lost their competitive advantage, and that's why it's very important to conduct those consumer panel testing every year or every 6 months, depending on the cycle. And we help companies revamp and improve their products accordingly. I think the next slide, it's about the example. Well, let me just walk you through an example of a project we conducted with a public listed companies that has been losing market share in their beverage business for about the last 3-4 years. So we were able to propose a holistic project in which we include several sets of capabilities, from food technology, from labeling, from market research, and the objective was to conduct this analysis and to come up with recommendation to the company. So we devised a specific methodology for this customer. We conducted benchmark analysis, sensory evaluation. We invited the consumer to in our facilities, because once we do focus group, we record everything. We assess the intrinsic quality, ingredient, health claims, allergens, certification. We went through the packaging. We also asked the consumer in terms of their user experience. This is the project that we devised for this company. And the following slide summarizes the outcomes, I think. Next slide. Yeah, this is something that we came up with. We got a lot of insight from the study. The study took us 1 month. We did that in two countries, in Belgium and France, and we came up with the following recommendation to the company. That there is an urgent need to reformulate some of the products. Other recommendations include increase or decrease ingredient quantities, because sometimes we found out that the ingredient, the percentage of ingredient is very high and it does not add any value. We also recommended some product extension. We have been helping them in terms of redesigning the packaging, improving color and typography, and increasing the convenience. And currently, the company is implementing our recommendation. So it's actually part of that strategic positioning for 2019. And I think this is it for me. Next slide. Thank you very much for joining me. I'm happy to answer any question you ask. Thank you. Over to you, Linda.
Thank you, Ashraf. I appreciate the fact that you've taken us through this process. I think there are a couple of very interesting points. It's a good week for new products and new product development in South Africa. We've had a couple of conferences going this week, and I have attended a number of presentations where these factors have been part of the discussion. I've noted, in preparing for this webinar, I noted that there are lots of companies that have had amazing product flops. I thought one of the interesting ones was Colgate, who decided to sell frozen dinners in 1982 and couldn't understand why nobody wanted to buy them, because obviously the consumers thought that the food would taste like their toothpaste. I'm sure that if you'd been involved with that organization, you would have said that was probably too far for their product development.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's very important. The thing is about, I started this presentation by saying that this product life cycle, it's very important to follow in order to increase the likelihood, increase your chance of product success in the market. That does not mean there's gonna guarantee. I mean, I know a lot of examples around big products that really failed in the marketplace, even though they did the right market research, etc. This is where the agility is very important. It's very important to include the customer early on, but create those small feedback loop cycles in order to, well, let's think about adding a sort of early adopters, having a set of people to preach for the product in your marketplace. Right now in France, for example, I know a brand that was developed last year. It's actually just milk. Just milk. I mean, it's not a very sophisticated product. A product very well regulated, and they asked 1,000 consumers what they would want in terms of the right pricing for the milk. And there's been a lot of issue about milk in Europe because there's a overproduction of milk, and the milk is quite cheap in the supermarkets. So these 1,000 consumers came up with the right price, and the company actually followed their advice, and they put the right price that the consumer would want, and the product has been very successful early on. So there's a lot of initiatives going on. That does not mean it's guaranteed the success, but it's only increased the likelihood, because as I said before, marketing research, it can be done. You can get a lot of insight, but sometimes we need to think outside the box to be successful.
Absolutely. I wonder if purple tomato sauce, if somebody perhaps thought too much outside the box in that regard. Heinz launched a purple sauce a few years ago, and also it just simply didn't work because they obviously didn't get the right consumer focus groups involved early enough in the process.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's completely agree with you.
I wanted to ask you a couple of questions with regards to, your comment regarding price and taste. I think that's quite interesting if you consider, the discussion around millennials and, you mentioned sustainability, you mentioned some of those other sort of buzzwords, there's the rise of veganism. It's just interesting that even in the research that you've just done, despite all of those aspects, price and taste are still come out tops.
I mean, that's very interesting. There was a study that was conducted by the European Commission 5 or 6 years ago around food safety, food quality, the trend, and the project is called 2050, sorry. It's very interesting to see the polarization in terms of trends. So it's going everywhere. So you will have a group of people who want to eat vegan. There are other people who want to go for a keto diet. But there are actually a major part of the population, they don't want to afford to buy food. And that does not mean that it is only one way, which explained a lot of niche markets. You will find a lot of niche markets around the globe. And this is the trend. It's going everywhere. It's becoming very volatile. And the food industry need to navigate this volatility and make sure that they take the most out of it. So there is not one answer for all the issues, but one need to identify in which area need to play.
Okay, so I think what you're saying is choose your niche and then exploit that niche, but don't necessarily try to be all things to all men.
Absolutely, that's absolutely. You summarized very, very well.
You mentioned that we need to be very aware of horizon scanning. From that perspective, I noticed you specifically said there's something that may be legal now could become illegal in a few years' time because of changes in legislation. European legislation moves a lot faster than South African legislation. So perhaps you can give us a couple of pointers in terms of what we should be thinking about for going forward. Obviously, you've got an insight to the European markets. Anything that we should be particularly aware of?
Well, there is a lot of things going on. What we found out actually is that despite all this legislation, etc., there's still a lot of issues around the food fraud, food scandal. I mean, the European Commission funded an important project for 5 years between 2012 and 2016, in which they developed a new way of managing food fraud risks. Those food fraud risks actually are not directly part of legislation. Legislation wouldn't say, well, you should make sure that the product is authentic, and there is no. It's not like a HACCP, or it's not like food hygiene. Those are very specific. But I mean, they help companies. The European Commission, they help companies to an NGO to develop ways of managing the emerging risk. I mean, the food fraud is a very important one. And that's why right now there is a trend in terms of local consumption, local suppliers, local product development, local product manufacturing, just to avoid having this complexity of the food chain. There's a lot of ingredient. I mean, there are hundreds of not ingredient, but preservatives and additives right now that on the European Commission radar. So one should take that in. So all the things around the flavors are being questioned every day by NGOs that revolve around the food safety at the European level. So I don't have a very specific. Well, let's take for example the sweeteners. 2 years ago, there's been an important studies by the European Commission around the safety of sweeteners, and they conclude that it's safe, but still there's a lot of attraction. There is a lot of NGO that they want the food industry to remove the use of sweeteners. These kind of things that need to be taken into account, and we can see. Because of these issues, we can see that the trend right now in the food manufacturing industry, they try to get rid of the preservative, the additives, in order to make the product. I'm going to use a word, although I don't like it, healthy,
yeah.
but it's not the right word. It's not the right
No.
word. But
Yeah.
just to remove the set of questionable additives and preservatives.
Absolutely. So you know, currently in South Africa, we are going through a process of sodium reduction. The government has had sort of, you know, like almost like a 5-year plan where certain products have been targeted based on the amount of salt and sodium, and there's been this progressive reduction, mandatory reduction. Is this a similar trend to what you've seen in Europe, or are we following the European trend?
Absolutely. This is something we helped a major retailer in Europe to go through all, I mean, they have thousands and thousands of private labels. So we helped them decrease the level of salt and sodium, and we tried to come up with a substitute. Definitely, this is something that we see here in Europe as well. But the thing is, again, for example, in Belgium, the local authorities they recommended to the food industry and retailers to use this grades in terms of product. Product A is product healthy. Product D is product it's less healthy, and you can see a lot of companies implemented this sort of score. It's called Nutri-Score, actually, to help the consumers to make the right choice. This is something that's being used in Belgium, and I'm pretty sure that's going to come in South Africa in the next following years.
That's a very interesting way of saying it, you know, Nutri-Score, because I think one of the challenges is just helping the consumer to actually understand the labels. We have quite significant labeling regulations, but the labels are still very technical and are not really written for sort of the, you know, the common man. And so a Nutri-Score would definitely assist the consumer in understanding whether this product is better for them, you know. I'm going to welcome Uli to the discussion. Uli, thank goodness we found you down in Stellenbosch. Can you hear me, Uli?
Yes, Linda, I can hear you.
Oh, I'm so glad that you're with us. Just in terms of Ashraf's presentation, I'm picking up on a couple of points with regards to, you know, emerging trends. It was quite interesting. Ashraf just mentioned the fact that food fraud is definitely you know, an increasing problem, and something that when you look at a new product development, you should really consider it. I know chatting beforehand, you were saying that food fraud is becoming an increasingly you know, topical issue in South Africa too.
Yes, that's right, Linda. I 3 weeks ago attended the North American Food Safety Conference in Chicago, and there were two very prominent topics. The one was food safety culture, and the other one was food fraud. And I also spoke about food fraud, and it's apparent that it's something that is on the rise, and the more awareness we get and create around this, the better. And with inception of a new product, this has to be taken into consideration by the product developers, that they from the beginning include the VASIP team or the food fraud team to look at the ingredients that they are going to source and potential sources of these ingredients, so that we don't select products or create products that are potentially going to be problematic to source because of high risk of food fraud.
Ashraf, do you find that in Europe the marketing team are included on the food safety team? I mean, how do you formally bring these two aspects together within a food safety or quality management system? What's your experience in that regard?
Well, this is a very interesting question. As you would imagine, in every company, mainly big companies, you have different departments. You have a marketing department, quality department, and sometimes they work in silos, and it's very difficult to go to the marketing team and talk about compliance, and even difficult to go to the quality department and talk about marketing studies. What we found very interesting is the message come across with decision makers. I mean, the example that I showed in my presentation, we worked with the CEO of the company. So we can't talk this kind of language with only a quality department because they don't handle the marketing thing. And we can't talk only with the marketing people because they don't necessarily understand the compliance. But there is a lot of bridges, and sometimes we can find a competitive advantage just through going through the label or the specification. Sometimes we find a specific ingredient which is well perceived in the market by consumers, and it comes from the compliance study of the product. When we go back to the marketing and say, this is what you need to communicate to the consumer, it's quite difficult, to be honest with you, but we have been trying to target decision makers in order, and when you talk, I have been talking to decision makers, CEOs and operation director, and frankly, within 2-3 minutes, they got the message.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, whether we're talking food fraud, food safety culture, product life cycle, I think, Uli, even you would agree, you know, the involvement of the top team, the CEO, the leadership team, as it's now put in, you know, ISO 22000 in 2018, we cannot, you know, exclude them. They're so key to making these decisions to ensure that the company manages risk in the correct way.
Yeah, this has to come from the top down, and management has to buy, or top leadership has to buy in on this and work it down right from the top. Just to go back to the previous comment as well, including marketing, from my experience in retail, what often happens is that marketing would want to make a very so-called sexy statement regarding a product, and it's not in compliance with regulation, and you can't make these type of claims. So it's important to involve them from the onset to get the right information out to the customer. And as Ashraf also mentioned, that they pick up on the right phrases, the right things, and market these things when they go out. So, but it's a collaboration. And I see too often that everything gets pushed down to the food technologists, to quality, to product developers, and they work in silos, and they're forced to work in silos, whereas they should, it should be a collaboration between business and everybody is involved, whether it's the quality of the product, the development of the product. If it's food fraud as well, we know that we need a comprehensive team that represents all spheres of the manufacturing process.
Absolutely. Uli, do you think that now that within FSSC version 5, we now have this voluntary or optional inclusion of the quality module, which obviously will require a company to use the whole of ISO 9001, but you don't think that that actually is of benefit when it comes to product life cycle, because it's within that standard that we have a whole section on product development, and so maybe by, you know, using this optional model, you can actually formalize some of these interactions where FSSC or rather ISO 22000 currently doesn't really, you know, go there. It doesn't spend a lot of time talking about product development as such.
Absolutely. That I fully agree with you, and it'll enable companies that follow that route to follow a specific process and apply that in product development. So yes, fully agree with you.
I'm glad I'm not the only one. Ashraf, I think it's quite interesting if we take it as, in our former lives, we were quality consultants. I think it's just quite interesting that, you know, there is a return to quality management aspects within a food safety environment, because, you know, some of these things have to actually be addressed through those management system aspects, not only focusing on the safety of the product.
Yeah, absolutely. You're right. We're not talking only about safety. I mean, ISO 22000 or FSSC 22000 has been focusing mainly on food safety. Now it's a quality part. But we need to go beyond that, because what we wanted to achieve is not only have a standard way of dealing with quality, because the issue with those standards, I mean, the BRC, the IFS, the FSSC, I mean, they are benchmark standards. So every company need to have the same thing. My message to the food industry, to retailers, you need to differentiate. So differentiate. Yeah. You need to upgrade. You need to use compliance in order to build competitive advantage. We need to go beyond that, and there is ways of doing it. PLC is one of the ways. There is digital innovation, a way of doing it. So it's very important to step up the game in order to go back to the, if I'm a quality director, go back to the CEO of my company and say, actually, I'm adding value to the business, not only in terms of managing risks, but also adding value to the bottom line through differentiating our product.
Absolutely, I like that. Use compliance to make you competitive. I think I might tweet that, and I think I might use that going forward, Ashraf. I'm going to quote you a lot because you know, I think often people see compliance as a hurdle for competitiveness, but if we can change that around, it just you know, it just becomes a lot more positive. I have a question from the audience. Tumi, thanks for your question. There's two aspects here. Are you seeing more testing being required as per local legislation? So, you know, from the European aspect, Ashraf, do you find that there's an increased need for product testing just in general? And I'm assuming here we're talking not only in terms of new products, but just in terms of, you know, legislation around product, you know, what is the composition and what is the safety?
Well, that's again a very interesting question, and I have been asked this question several times. And I worked in the past with laboratories conducting micro testing, chemical testing. So in terms of legislation, if you go through the legislation, you have a set of tests that need to be conducted mainly for animal-based product. But I think, again, it's my personal opinion, I think that the majority of testing that's conducted, it's not mandatory by law. It's something that a company need to do in order to verify that they are working in a safe environment. So a test that you do on a product, it just help you to validate that your environment is safe. So I see differences in terms of European countries. The UK, for example, they do very few testing when it comes to food. If you go to France, man, they do testing a lot because local authorities, they ask them. So we have a lot of differences. So the point is to develop a testing program that's gonna show that you are controlling your micro and chemical risks. That's the point.
Yeah, absolutely, and it has to be fit for purpose, and at the end of the day, it's your due diligence defense as well. You know, from a liability perspective, to be able to demonstrate that your product does comply, whether it be contractually with your retailer requirements or whether it be mandatory requirements in terms of legislation. Uli, your experience from the South African perspective, are you seeing, you know, an increase in testing since the listeriosis outbreak?
Well, definitely, we've picked up that there's a lot of more testing being conducted and a lot of more awareness about it, whether it's a continuous process or just as a result of what happened in and during the listeriosis outbreak. That I'm not sure of, but definitely an increased awareness and hopefully a continuous process to improve and food safety standards within the industry, and not only relating to the products that were affected by the listeriosis, but a general awareness would be fantastic.
Absolutely, and again, I think we can't test safety into a product. You know, this is important. Dr. Annelies made this comment this week on one of the conferences where she spoke. You can't test food safety into a product, but but we should be making sure that we're doing all the relevant testing in order to confirm that we can make a product safely and that the environment in which we make it is also safe. And I think when it comes to product life cycle, you know, the validation of the process of manufacturing the product does also require testing, because it's one thing to make it in the, you know, new product development environment, but can we commercialize the product? Can we actually make it in our factory, you know, given the factory environment, and can we consistently achieve those results?
Yeah, I agree with that, Linda. And the other thing is also to challenge, and specifically also, I think something that Professor Peter Goos mentioned is to look for these things and not try not to find them, actually try and find them.
Absolutely. So if you're not looking for something, you're not going to find it. So we need to be a little bit more proactive. Ashraf, just you know, a final comment from your perspective. You're looking down at us from the European continent. You know, any observations with regards to the sort of, you know, African market? You know, any observations with regards to products that are coming in from Africa, and, you know, that might be coming into the European market, you know, anything specific that we should consider?
Well, I think I can see two trends. Again, as I said before, two opposing trends. On one side, I think there's a lot of opportunities in terms of local suppliers wanting to export their product and have their product being sold in the European markets, because I know very well that I just met, for example, last month a guy who wants to develop sort of a QSR, quick service restaurant specific for African food. There is a lot of things going on in terms of niche markets. So I think there's a lot of opportunities out there, but at the same time, you have these trends in terms of consuming local, consuming having low footprints. You have the CO2 issue. There are opposing trends. My advice is to find the right niche and differentiate. If you want to really succeed in a market, you need to find this specific niche and seize that opportunity.
Great. Thank you so much for your time. It's been really interesting listening to you and sort of thinking about, you know, new products that I've seen on the market, and having a better understanding of what actually has gone into ensuring that those products are successful. Very interesting comments that you've made regarding, you know, consumer behavior. The fact that consumers, you know, what they tell us versus how they feel can be two different things. So I think that was very interesting comments. And I, you know, wish you well with these services in the South African market. Hopefully that, you know, we're making sure that we think about our product life cycle will do just what you've said. You know, it will help us to get the most out of our products and to use them to create that competitive edge. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. Thank you for your time. Thank you for, you know, dialing in from Belgium. Uli, thank you very much for helping us today. I know that it's the doctor booked you off officially, but thank you so much for breaking your sick notes and for helping us with this webinar. If you have any further questions, ladies and gentlemen, you're more than welcome to send them through to us, and we will make sure that the webinar is, you know, posted on our website. And so we look forward to your feedback in this regard as well. Thanks, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. Bye-bye.